This is Dan Schneider. This is going to be another Arts and Life video that I've done with several people. I'm going to be interviewed by a young man named Ned Williams. He lives over in China, is it?
Yes, in
Yes.
China right now.
And so it is January 2nd, 2022. I just want to ask Ned a couple of questions about himself, just to give a little bit of background, then I'll turn it over, and we will be talking about my 4-book memoir that's over 15 years old now, True Life. So Ned, thank you for contacting me initially. Thank you for reading my books and giving me feedback, and thank you for agreeing to do this. If you could just give a little bit of background, one, about who you are personally and artistically, and also then how you found Cosmoetica and or my work. So, Ned.
Yeah, great. So, yeah, my name is Ned Williams. You can't tell I'm from the United States, from North Carolina, actually. And how I found your work, well, I was in college having a English, and when I went in, I guess I was very starry-eyed about everything. But then slowly, I found out that things were not as they seemed. All my professors seemed to be, kind of full of shit. They didn't know what was going on, and I think my Google search history reflected that. I was going through a crisis of faith. I thought where I was going, everyone would know what was going on. We know. I thought they would know, and I saw your channel pop up on my feed, and it was probably something like, I don't know, Shakespeare or something on that. And I just clicked on it, and I found you being interviewed in one of these interviews, I think. And a lot of what you said made sense to me. And so that was interesting. And then I found your website, went through all of the Search and Destroy article essays. I think I went through most of them. I think I emailed you about that one article about that guy who ran a poetry magazine, and he was in the creative writing circuit with that stuff. Anyways, that article really spoke to me because it's exactly, I'm not sure when that was written, in the 90s, maybe early 2000s, but it's exactly the same now, if not worse. And so I started looking for a way to contact you, and I found that you had hidden it. I was like, oh, okay, so this one must be real. And so I just emailed you, and literally the 12 hours later, you emailed me back.
Okay, so just so people know, I said this is January 2nd, so it's a little after 6:30 in the morning here where I am in Austin, Texas, and you're not in Singapore or Hong Kong, you're the city in China outside of Hong Kong, so you're 14 hours ahead, so it's Sunday evening.
All right. Yeah. 14 hours ahead. I am right outside of Hong Kong in a city called Shenzhen.
And
called Shenzhen in Guangdong province.
And I looked that up. So that wasn't really even a city before 20 years ago. It's really just been built up sort of like as a sister city to Hong Kong, although, right?
Shenzhen has a very interesting history. There was only a few people living here up until 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And now it's something like 12 million. It was designated as a special economic zone under one of the presidents. And they're allowed to use capitalism. Like, you had to have a pass to get in here or something. I've known some people who are older Chinese who actually lived here, and it was an interesting situation. But now it's the most profitable, biggest city, one of the biggest cities in China. So it's really cool. It's cool to teach in, I must say.
So do you speak Chinese then?
No, I'm working on it. I speak a little bit of Chinese, but
okay.
I should.
There are numbers of Chinese. Is it mostly Han or is it Cantonese or?
Right. So the Han is the ethnicity. So 90% of Chinese people are Han, but the language that everyone speaks is Mandarin.
Ah, that's right. Okay. All right. Well, unless you have some interesting tidbits to share about yourself and your adventures in China, I will turn it over to you. And as I said, we'll do it in 15, 20-minute segments. So ask away.
Great. All right. Ready?
Yep.
All right. Let's do it. All right. So let's see here. Today is January 2nd, 2022, and I'm talking with Dan Schneider, who runs the Cosmoetica website, which I guess it is the oldest running arts website in the world. I have recently read 4 or 5 of his books, and this is what we're going to be talking about today. and my name is Ned Williams. So my very, very first question, since you said it's been 15 years since you wrote these books, which is interesting.
Actually, 18 now, since it's 2022. It was in 04. So, but anyway.
Okay. 18 years. That's interesting. One of the running themes in the book and is memory. And one of the things that you say in the book is, are memories something you have or something you've lost? So I want to, and near the end of the memoirs, you write about how you wrote them in a creative fervor over a 9-month period or something.
Yeah.
So I really want to ask you, what do you remember about writing these 4 memoirs, these 4 books?
Well, that quote that you actually said, is memory a thing you have or lost, is from a Woody Allen film called Another Woman, by the way. And that's,
Right.
If you haven't seen that film, it's a really great film with a great American actress, Jenna Rollins, and it's one of the top 3 or 4 Woody Allen films. I'll eventually get to it in my great film series. As far as the memories of writing about the memories, I decided to write the books just because I wanted to get down things. As you get older, you're what, 20, in your mid-20s maybe?
Yes.
You'll find as you get older, the brain has a limited storage capacity. And I needed to write this down. It was a transition from just writing essays and poetry at the time to then trying to write creative fiction. And so I wanted to write down the names of, like, the kids in the gang, the kids that I grew up with, because I knew that if, let's say, I tried to write these books now, I would miss things, because just like, the universe supposedly is expanding and some galaxies are going to go off, they're going faster than the speed of light. Once they get beyond the horizon, we'll never see them again, the cosmic horizon. I might not have retained some of these memories. Now at least I know I can go back and look. Now the names are different. Let's say if I had a pal named Bill and I call him Bob in the book, I'm not going to necessarily remember the names, but if I look at the memo and say, oh, that's when Bill and I did this, but I say it's Bob. So it's just, it was a mnemonic device for me to remember things when I get old and senile. Yeah, so that's why I wrote that, so that I would have, because even 18 years, I'm 56. When I wrote that, I was 38. I was only about 20 years removed from my high school years, which a lot of that takes place in the book. And I knew that I would forget names and things that happened. So it was mnemonic, and also as a bridge to writing fiction rather than just poetry.
Interesting. So one of the things I really liked about the book is that it seems like the 4 books is that you have these memoirs, and almost, I guess, with almost every memoir you have.
Hope you just froze up there.
Poems before the memoirs.
Well, yeah, I decided to use the poetry because they're called True Life, and they have little Italian subtitles. And there's it's not La Dolce Vita. What? Let's see. True Life one here. That's La Vita Nuova. Yeah, that's right. It was La Vita Nuova was what's his name? Dante's book, where he did that. He mixed poetry and prose, and I thought, that's interesting, because I always liked Dante's La Vita Nuova, that series of poems and prose about his life, more than I ever did the Divine Comedy, or just the comedy, technically. And so I said, well, that would be an interesting thing. So each of the books has that Italian subtitle, and I said, well, I'm going to out Dante because, quite frankly, looking at my life and from what people would tell me when I would talk with them, as I'm talking with you, I said, I led a much more interesting life than Dante in 1,000 years, once, all of us who are alive now are ancients, and we're in the future public's consciousness. They're going to say, they're not going to see much of a difference between when Dan Schneider lived and when Walt Whitman lived and when Dante lived. That they're old and dead people. So I said, let me outdo him. That way people will say, And also, one of the things I like doing in art is making connections and acknowledging things from the past. I just recently finished a novel, for example, called The Grand and the Glorious. And like with a lot of my novels, and as you read Tumbleweeds and A Norwegian in the Family, you'll see I have extensive notes where I borrow a line here or a line from a song there or something. And so I always try to give the credit, to show that art isn't just me, pulling great stuff out of my head, although there's a lot of things that I can do that no one else has done. But to improve on something, to say, oh, here, Dante 800 or 900, however many years ago, he wrote this interesting quasi-memoir, you might call it, about his life. 900 years later or something, I said, well, I can do that, and I can do it better because I've got those 900 years of literature from the West and the rest of the world, in fact, to do so. So, that's why that came about.
All right, so I assume because I remember in the memoirs you said that you intentionally did not plot the books very much
Yeah.
because you wanted to be like a raw, just like from your memories as it goes. But you also have these poems you wrote. I know you've written, I don't know, thousands of poems, well, maybe, and so maybe you just had enough poems for literally every single story you wanted to write. But was there a moment where you're like, well, I've got a poem for this. This happens. This is a very important thing. Maybe I'll start the memoir, this whatever memoir it is, and I'll write towards the poem. Did that ever happen?
Sure, sure. I mean, not always, but each of the individual memoirs, and I guess I average about 40, 45 in them, so there's probably about 170 to 180 memoirs across the 4 books. Um, you you don't want to, in art, ever repeat yourself, even within one work. One of the things that I've said many times to artists is one of the most important things that you can do in art is learn how to forget. And what I mean by that is don't forget the techniques. If you're writing poetry, or you're writing memoirs, or you're even just doing journalism, remember the techniques of how to get into a character's mind, how to end a chapter or a book with a real bang, how to open a chapter, how to make good conversation between characters that's realistic and also good. But don't remember the specifics. Remember the generalities, because you don't ever want to keep going back to the same well. If let's say I was writing love sonnets to a girl, and I went through a dozen girls in a few years that I was enamored of, you don't want to have every poem begin, oh, her breasts are wonderful. That would get boring. So you focus on the individual specifics, but know how to write a love sonnet to a woman, or if you're gay, I guess, to a guy, that that will have meaning, and will have a way to get the reader in, because you always want to keep in mind you're not just writing for yourself. That's just masturbation. You want to connect to someone, just as Dante connected to me in the writing of these memoirs.
Mm-mm. I see. Yeah, that's very interesting. I gotta say, I'm using my memories too to remember all of them, because it's such like a wave of content in my brain. I read all 4 of them in over a period of 4 months, 5 months, or something like that. I remember I read the first one and it was good, but for some reason I didn't get to the second, third, or fourth one. But then one day I was in between jobs. I got a new job and I've got a lot of time. And then the second, third, or fourth one, it was interesting because it's very hard to put them down for some reason. Mm-hmm. You have like a real knack of just like grabbing you by the collar, and just like it's very difficult for me to put down the stories sometimes. It's strange because it's not that the stories you're telling are always that different from what someone else is saying. The way that you approach it, the way you actually get into the prose is I don't even know. I don't know if you could actually teach that to somebody.
Well, here's what I did. I wrote the 4 books. They right now the final word count is like 680,000. When I wrote the first 4 books and I went through them all, it was like 860,000. So I cut 180,000 words, but I didn't cut anything essential. What I did was I pared back a lot of adjectives. I pared back a lot of conjunctions and articles. And so I compressed that, and it is amazing that I was able to get basically a book's worth of stuff out of it just by compressing it. And one of the things that I did there, and the reason it has sort of that Hemingway-esque rat-a-tat-tat thing, although it's even more compressed than Hemingway, but that's to give it that immediacy, so that there isn't that languid flowing. Now, if and when you get finished reading Vincetti Brothers, you'll see in Vincetti Brothers, I started doing what I call, oh God, see, this is why I write things down.
Total immersion.
What?
The immersion technique.
Yeah, total immersion. See, you know that more than me.
Yeah.
And so you can see how I would sometimes go longer to get that naturalistic feel. I didn't want that in this book because true life, obviously I can't remember everything, and if I write about going out with a girl or whatnot, she would have a different memory of any date or sexual encounter than I would. And so there's a play on that too, is that I wanted to give that immediacy that real life has, so that it has that sort of true life feel to it. So that's I paid attention. So if you compare the writing in True Life to what you read in Tumbleweeds, which is a little bit away from it, Vincetti Brothers, which moves farther, and once you get to Norwegian the family, it gets to the total immersion totally. And then if you read later books, you'll see how I play with that and I use different techniques more freely. Sometimes I will use total immersion, sometimes I won't, sometimes I'll. Anyway, you have to keep evolving because you don't want to, no matter how great a particular book or a poem might be, you don't want to keep writing the same stuff. And this is a problem that a lot of artists fall into. They keep milking the same cow. I mentioned Woody Allen, for example. He's a good example because he had his great period of filmmaking, his golden era, if you want to call it, or golden age, from about 77 to 92. He spent the last 30 years, though, just rehashing his greater works in lesser works. And some of them are still good and better than the crap Hollywood turns out, but they're nothing compared to his great stuff. So I don't want to be writing True Life. I don't want to be writing a Norwegian in the Family when I'm 70. Hopefully I'll go on to other things.
So why does that idea? Because what you just said is perfectly reasonable. It's perfectly reasonable. It's an observation that I've made many, many times about writers and directors and whatnot like that. What you just said is perfectly reasonable and logical. You want to evolve. You don't want to keep on doing the same thing. It's so obvious that a lot of writers, doesn't matter who it is, they just take 2,000 years to write your first album. You got like a year to write your second one.
Yeah.
It's this classic thing where it's just like over and over and over again. It's just these directors who are great. They're great at what they're doing. They just stop doing it. Why is it so obvious to you? And why does it seem like very few people are actually trying to evolve?
Well, in film, for example, take Martin Scorsese. You know, he did that film a couple of years ago with De Niro and Pesci, The Irishman, and it was it was a bad film. I mean,
it's very boring.
Yeah,
very boring.
It was dull, and why would you want to do that again? I mean, I've already done that, so why would I want to do that? It's like, and why? As to why people, it's easy. Sometimes people have financial incentives. MFA writing programs incentivize this because and this is one of the things too with like True Life is about me, but the fact that I'm a white male is incidental. I don't want to, if for example, let's say I was a quadriplegic or a paraplegic and stuck in a wheelchair, conceivably I could write a memoir about life in a wheelchair, and I'm sure I could, and it would be good. But would I want to make that part of me? This is the whole thing with identity politics too, is that, what is identity? Now, someone would say, well, you're a white male, you got blue eyes and blonde hair, Dan, you must have had an easy life. Well, if you read my books, I didn't. But yes, life would have been harder had I been born black or had I been born a Muslim in the U.S. and still lived in the same areas or whatnot. But you and I or any other person is not simply a group of features physically. We all have ways. We all have insights on something. We're all these minds in the body, and you have to move beyond yourself. As I've said many times, the universe, as far as we know, is 14 or so billion years old according to current theories. It may, in fact, be timeless if there's a larger metaverse or megaverse or omniverse or multiverse or whatever you want to call it. But in all of that, the only thing that interests you is yourself and your own puny perceptions. I'm not saying everyone has to write, Isaac Asimov like space operas or whatnot, but sometimes I think, if I see a little bug crawling along, what is that bug thinking, looking up at me? If there was a bug crawling across my screen as I'm speaking to you, does that, you and I are conversing because we have powers of observation and intellect that these little sounds we make, we can interpret and we can get cognitive things from. But a little bug, a millipede or something crawling across my screen would just hear sound. It would be unintelligible to it. Even the whole world that we live in would be unintelligible. As imagine if there really were ghosts, for example. They might have, they might look at us and say, boy, those stupid living people, they don't understand what the cosmos is really like. And so you have to think of these things and approach things with these different ideas, because they're interesting. They give credence to the idea that there are things beyond just the self. And too many people nowadays, and politically, I understand why identity politics exists, but that can't be an excuse for limiting yourself to just yourself. If, for example, I was yesterday sketching out the next 8 or 9 plays of mine. One of the plays I'm going to do is about when the Vikings came to North America and met some native tribes. And I was looking up which native tribes would play, and there's a tribe in the Gulf of St. Lawrence area called the Mi'kmaq. And I said, let me do the play from their perspective, where the Vikings are the outsiders, and the Vikings, they can't understand what the Vikings are saying. And now someone would say, well, that's cultural appropriation. How can you write from a Native American perspective? Or since they're in Canada, they'd be called First Nations. Easy. I've got an imagination. If there's no greater stretch of imagination for me to write from a Native American perspective 1,000 years ago when the Vikings were in North America than it is for me in a later science fiction novel set 1,500 years from now. Why can I write about aliens that live 1,500 years from now when mankind gets out into the stars, but it's verboten for me to write about Native Americans 1,000 years ago? That's silly. I wrote a play about mound builders too, which is set 1,500 years ago. There is nothing as a human being that can experience that I can't empathize with. I'm never going to know, for example, because I'm a male, what vaginal yeast infections are like. But that doesn't mean that because I can't actually feel what a vaginal yeast infection is like, I don't know what some kind of infection or what some kind of problem physically is going to be there. And people delimit their universes for many reasons. A lot of it now is political correctness, and I understand the impulse to it. I think it's a good thing to want to try to know about Native Americans 1,000 years ago, or about black lesbians in today, or about whatever it might be. But you can't tell an artist that they can't write about this. I have more in common, and I'm going to know more about, for example, the human side of those Native Americans 1,000 years ago than a Native American who isn't creative will. Yes, they may know the particular ceremonies that their people did 1,000 years ago, but they're not going to understand what it's like to be human and get inside that human 1,000 years dead, whether it's an ancient Chinese, whether it's an ancient Native American, whether it's a Roman, whether it's an African, whether it's a Patagonian, or whether it's a Maori person from New Zealand. That is the thing that an artist can do. And when you tell an artist they can't do that, what you are doing is you are screwing future generations. Because if a great artist comes up with, let's say, some young kid like you contacts me, and they could be a great poet, and they want to write a great poetry sequence about, this, that, or the other thing. Who the fuck am I or you or anyone to tell them they can't do that? Yes, if they do it poorly, criticize them. But don't criticize them for the desire to do that. The desire to get in other people's shoes is a good thing. It's called empathy. That's the thing that should be encouraged by people who are so-called politically correct. Not to say that, oh, you can't do that. But now I'm going off on a political rant. So
No, that's fine. No, it's something that obviously I encountered quite a bit in college. It's something that it seems almost intentional. It's trying to destroy things. I'm reminded of this interview I saw. I think George R. R. Martin was on he was on a talk show, and one of the things that they said to him was, you write women very well. How do you do it? And he goes, well, women are people too.
Yeah.
And it's not a joke, but everyone laughed about it. Yeah. And there is that kind of thing where it's just like, well, women and black people and gay people, they may be women and gay and black. I'm not any of those things, but they're also people.
Yeah.
And that idea is completely it seems foreign now to people. It seems like something that's completely getting destroyed right now. Because I graduated college 5 years ago, and it was ridiculous. Like, you couldn't say anything. I took a black literature class, and obviously there have been great black American writers, obviously. But my job there was just to be quiet, not to say one thing for or especially against. It's very odd.
Yeah, well, for example, if you've seen Cosmoetica, you know that I promoted a black poet named James Emanuel. He died about 8 or 9 years ago. He was a great poet. He lived 90 plus years. He had an interesting story. But if you're promoting Maya Angelou shit poetry or Alice Walker shit poetry, and you're putting them in the quote unquote canon because simply of their skin color, you're doing a disservice to not only the future readers by putting crap out there, but what you're doing by not having the James Emanuels, an actual great poet who happens to be black, you're screwing him too, and you're screwing the readers, because he deserves to be there because of what he wrote, not because of his skin color. And this is something people don't get. Oh, Dan, how can you say that? Well, I've read the poetry of black Dorgulus and white Dorgulus, and no one's a bigger critic of people like Donald Hall, a bad white poet who died recently, or Robert Bly. No one's a bigger critic of David Foster Wallace or the guy who wrote Dave Eggers, or all of these terrible white male writers. But the solution to the old boy network is not to create a new girl network of bad PC writers. It's to actually focus on the good writing. Get rid of the Foster Wallaces, get rid of the Maya Angelous, and put in the Maya Angelous, and put in the James Emanuels, and a writer like me or my wife Jessica. That's how you do it. You don't just start segregating again. And this is one of the problems with a lot of political liberals. And I consider myself a progressive, and I don't want to get off into political rant, but one of the problems with a lot of liberals is that they embrace a lot of the things that 50 years ago they would have railed against coming from conservatives. And it's human, and I know why people do that and why they want to boost this or that thing. We want to know about transsexuals, or we want to know about Sikh religion or whatnot. I did a whole show on the religion of Sikhism or whatnot. But you have to do things like that with the intent of putting the things out there and letting people decide. I can't say, for example, I can't comment on Indian society, India, and say, well, Sikhism is better than Hinduism because of A, B, or C. I might think that the Jains are better than that, but still, you put it out there, and someone is going to take it. What you think pro or con, for example, of True Life is going to be maybe slightly different than someone else who might get something else from it, and that should be acknowledged.
All right, so real quick, I know you're on a tangent, but there was something you mentioned about David Foster Wallace, Dave Eggers, and Robert Bly. One of the reasons I know these names now is because of you and Cosmoetica, and you did talk about it some in your memoirs. And I know we want to talk about the memoirs, but real quick, it was funny because when I was in college, David Foster Wallace is a god. He's a god. You don't say anything negative about him. They have that super. I'm not sure if you've seen his speech about "This Is Water." Have you seen that? Yeah. That's like they just pulled up on YouTube. They're like, "Say no more." I mean, it's like, all right. And I never read him. Like his. It's funny because you write essays, he writes essays. I read one of his essays, and it was just like it was masturbatory. It was really, I don't know. Anyways, if the first time I ever heard a negative word about DFW, whatever his name is, it was from you, and it was fascinating because as soon as you said it, it was like it gave me permission to like criticize this man, and all of a sudden I started thinking about all the things I heard him say, the little bit that I read by him, and I was like, oh my god, it is bad. Everything you wrote is bad. And so it seems that we're in this weird point. I don't think people want to promote David Foster Wallace because they know it's bad art. I think they're incapable of doing it. Obviously, if poetry is the highest form of art, it's also going to be the most intellectual. So these things will not be very easy to determine the quality. Not very.
Well,
obviously. So you need a good critic, whatnot.
And just a quick point. No one should ever give you or any other reader or any other arts fancier permission to do things. And that's a very politically correct term, and I know why you used it. But the whole notion is just so ridiculous because as a thinking being and you're engaging art, whether it's song, whether it's even dance or acting, or whether it's the more creative arts like painting, film, various forms of literature, or classical music, you don't need permission. I just as I don't need permission, for example, to write about the Native American encounters with Vikings and do it from a Native American's perspective. I don't need anyone's permission. I don't need that tribe's permission, you know. And if someone criticized me, I'd say, oh, okay. I said, so you don't want me to write about your tribe meeting the Vikings? You do it. And if you're not going to do it, or you don't have anyone capable to do it, then don't complain about it. Now, if you say that you think my characterization is bad, or that I got certain things wrong, well, okay, that's fine. But this is another thing too. When you write, for example, the most important thing is character, because all art, all drama, it's all about character. Plot is character, as I've said, or character is plot. If, for example, I wrote about the Congolese people of 1,000 years ago, or one of the ancient African kingdoms, excuse me, and let's say I wrote, I'd write something like, they are in typical attire of their era. Because I'm not going to go looking around what types of sandals they might have worn, or what types of tunics or whatever they might have, or loincloths or whatnot. That ultimately is unimportant. Just like if I'm writing about gangsters from the late 20th century here in the U.S., I don't have to tell you about every little farting mafia kind of code word or whatnot. You have an idea. If I say to you a Spartan warrior, you're going to get a certain image. If I say to you Marilyn Monroe, you're going to get an image. Whether you think Marilyn Monroe is beautiful or not, whether you think the Spartans look silly or not, it is going to be there. And so if I say, Apache warrior from the 17th century or something, you're going to have a certain idea of what they probably looked like. That they may not look in your mind as they actually did. Maybe there's a 10-15% difference. Who cares if the story is good enough? And this is where people focus on the wrong things. If I'm writing, say, a historical novel about, say, Dwight Eisenhower, who was the head general of the American forces in World War II and later became president, I have to hew more to the known facts. But if I'm writing about Shaka Zulu, a famous warrior from Africa, a couple of hundred years ago when he battled I guess it was the English or the Boers or whatnot, do I really need to know if Shaka Zulu, had 10 concubines or 100? Is that real? People may not know because it's not as recorded and well recorded as, say, even something from 1,000 years ago from ancient China. It doesn't matter. That's focusing on the wrong thing. And people always do this, and you'll get these little gotcha moments where people will, let's say it's a great novel someone wrote, and someone will focus on, well, it's a good novel or it's a good film or whatnot, but the way that the clothing was portrayed, or the way that the accents that they used weren't quite that way. it's like you're missing the fucking point, because if you're focusing on that, you're not really giving due to the artist. If you're going to criticize an artist, at least have the decency to, if I'm reading a piece of shit by David Foster Wallace, I actually read it. There are many times I've read reviews of things where the person clearly didn't read it, because you can read in a paragraph or two, that didn't happen in the book. What often happens, I don't know if you've ever seen this in reviews, is people will start cribbing other people's reviews. So let's say you write a review and you get a fact point wrong about a film that you saw. I'm some idiot who's lazy and has an online site. I don't watch the whole movie. Maybe I get bored halfway through, and yet I take a few points that you made in your film. One of them is wrong, and I repeat that. And someone does that to me, and onward and onward. This is why you often get movies, great films, with stuff that isn't correct. A good example is there are a few films where characters don't have names, like Michelangelo Antonioni's film Blow Up. The characters don't have any names, but people keep writing the same stuff, that the character was named this, that, or the other thing, because a bad review looked at, for example, the film's promotional material and saw that in the promotional material, originally the character was going to have a name, but the name is never used on screen, so the character doesn't have a name. And so this is the way you get a lot of bad art and bad criticism, is that people just repeat the same bad things because they're lazy. Again, I'm going off tangent, but
no, that's fine. It seems to just be compounding. It seems to be happening more and more, because the whole MFA thing that happened. Because I'm not an MFA person, but I was around it. There was this one time I was in my class. I had one really good professor there. He was a Irish guy. He was nominated for a Pulitzer. To my shame, I didn't read anything that he had. But one day he comes into class and he's like, "Hey guys, there's a reading downstairs. Instead of class, fuck it, let's just go." And we did. And there was this one professor introducing these two people, and he just starts like talking about how amazing he was. He's so good on the piano. And then he reads and I can't remember a single line from the piece that he read. Mm-hmm. It was just like bad. And then no one criticized him. But as soon as someone asked a question, it was like, "Well, yeah, that one part's unclear." And I could tell immediately he got upset. And then his wife, she did her whole prose piece in a Russian accent. She was like a Russian stripper. She did her whole piece. She just stood up there. She did her whole piece as a Russian stripper. And it was ridiculous. And then I realized, oh my God, these people are covering for each other. It's a big fucking sham. They're just trying to like get each other money, get each other a little bit of fame or whatever this stuff is. This does not produce anything of quality whatsoever. This is where we're living in. This is like, if you look up any recent Pulitzer nominated books, like they gave one Pulitzer like 2 years ago to some guy because they didn't know who to give it to, but this guy wrote about the environment or something like that. And so, I remember you said something recently, or maybe a year ago, about Colson Whitehead. Colson Whitehead wrote this book about the Underground Railroad, and they gave him a Pulitzer about that. And it's funny because when I saw that, I was actually reading it at the time. It was assigned to me, and I didn't finish it, so I never wrote a review, obviously. But I read the first two chapters of it, and it was just like intellectually the whole idea of having a railroad. Yes, that's bad too. But the writing itself was the prose, the line by line prose, the syntax, everything about it was really bad. Like I could tell they just gave it to him. Like, we got a black author. He's writing about slavery. Check. Pulitzer. That was it.
Well, let me give you. I mentioned Donald Hall. I don't know how much you know about poetry. Donald Hall was a bad poet. He was even a bad critic. He couldn't even write reviews well. He was a college professor. He dumped his first wife back, I guess, in the 60s or 70s for a woman named Jane Kenyon, who's another bad poet. Kenyon died in the mid to late 90s of breast cancer or something. And a year or so afterwards, this was right around the same time Ted Hughes died, husband of Sylvia Plath. Donald Hall went around and he wrote this terrible book of poetry, supposedly in praise of his dead wife. And I remember he came to Minneapolis, where I was living at the time, and I went to the reading with a woman that I know, not romantic, but we were colleagues in poetry, and we went to it. It was at a church in Minneapolis, and we listened to him reading these poems. And I remember after the second or third poem, I knew how Donald Hall was going to react. And we got to one poem, and I said, as he starts reading, I said to this woman, I said, now he's going to cry in about 10, 15 seconds. And sure enough, he started weeping. I knew the way he was trying to manipulate it. And I'm not saying you can't have passion, or you can't, if you're doing a reading where you have multiple characters, try to take on a little bit of a difference in the voice. But if you're reading something, you have to let the words come through. If I'm reading a poem, the words are of import, not necessarily how I'm emoting them. And this is one of the things that happens with slam poetry, especially whenever people do readings, is they try to cover up the execrable writing by doing the they do hand gesticulations, and they do this jazzy kind of runs, and it's like that's defeating the very purpose of why you're writing. If I'm reading a scene written about when my mom died, I don't need to tear up to get it. Now, if I'm genuinely moved, okay. But with Donald Hall, I knew exactly what he was doing. I knew how he was playing this audience of mostly old white people in the late 90s. And I just found it phony. And over the course of years, every so often I for example, I once at a reading confronted Robert Bly, and I made specific claims about why his stuff was bad and why he sold out, because he actually had talent, unlike Hall, but he sold out, and he wrote this book Iron John that sparked the men's movement 30 years ago, and it was just such a piece of shit. And I remember when I actually spoke to him when we were in a line for him to sign books. I didn't buy a book, but a friend of mine did. And, I said, I know and you know that you sold out. You gave up your talent to have this little bit of funny and money and fame. And I said, why did you do it? And he didn't answer me because he couldn't. And now you could say, well, Dan, how could you be so impudent to do that? But how could he be so impudent to put out garbage, knowingly do so, and to not? And this gets recently, for example, I was talking with some friends because a number of people that I know in the arts, for one reason or another, are not pursuing the arts with the vigor and not making use of their talents enough. And I've had to tell a few of these people, and they get angry at you or whatnot. But ultimately, I think most of them know that I'm telling them the truth, and it might take a few years for them to get over that. But you have to put it out there. But again, go on to your next question.
Well, it just seems that, because I think I wrote to you recently that writing in particular is a very polite thing. And so the fact that I can only imagine what it was like, because you write in True Life about the Minneapolis Uptown Poetry Group, and I've been in poetry groups, obviously, and they're very polite things where you just encourage people mostly, and it's all very useless. Do you think, confronting Donald Bly and this stuff? Obviously, I've never really met you. I haven't been around your life. I only know what I've read about you. But since you seem to have such a gigantic body of work, a quite unprecedented amount of work that's quality, the stuff you sent me is all very few typos. I don't even know how you do that. If the amount too, I don't even know how you do that.
I've got lots of typos.
Right. Well, do you think that you have? I don't know. Maybe a conspiracy theorist. Have you blacklisted yourself at all for going after these people?
I mean, I would call it blacklisting, but certainly there are people that Jessica sent around her stuff and my stuff years ago for years. When I started writing plays a few years ago, they don't even get looked at. I don't think that there's anyone sitting, oh, we're going to screw Dan Schneider and his wife like that. But most of these people, they don't know what quality is. So let's say if I send a book of my poems, and I've been putting poem books recently up on Amazon. If I have a great poem, if I have a book of great poems, great sonnets or whatnot, these motherfuckers, they're not going to know what's good or not. Someone who suckled on the tit of David Foster Wallace or Alice Walker is not going to have a fucking clue about what good writing, prose or poetry is. How can they? If all you're exposed to is garbage, how can that person know what quality is? And so, like I said earlier, I said, you know, plot is character. Well, I think about books, and I'm not saying you can't have a plot or whatnot. There was a woman that I knew 20 some years ago. This young girl who was uh, I won't get into it, but I mean, she claimed she wanted to be a poet and whatnot, and we almost got you know, intimate. And years later, she's married to some guy, and she's down. She's lived all over the world, in the U.S. and other countries with her husband. And I saw a post that she did, because on Facebook or whatnot, you know, people's names come up every month or so, a couple of months. You know, friend this person, friend that person, and I guess they have the algorithms that they can see your old emails and whatnot. I saw her thing come up, so I clicked on her Facebook thing, and she had on her wall, she had this terrible idea for a book, sort of, I forget what it was, taking the basic plot of Moby Dick but making it into some kind of trans tale about life in the 20th century or something, and it was an absurd thing, but she had a whole timeline on her wall where she'd have post-its of each year on it. That book is doomed. Even, let's say, if she had writing talent, which I don't know if she ever made anything of it, what you're doing is you're circumscribing the art to such a degree that there's no way that it's going to be inclusive, no way that it's going to reach out. When I write something like this novel that I just finished, or when I write True Life, you have to have an overall overarching idea, but you have to be ready so that when you're in 70% of the way into the book and something isn't working, you say, I've got to do this. And then that necessitates you going back and changing certain elements. Or you might have the best idea for your book, or if you're making films, 75% of the way in. Well, what are you going to do? Are you going to stick with the original idea just because it would be easier? No, you have to go back. You have to have that organic process where everything keeps bubbling. My wife Jessica just wrote an essay on James Joyce's The Dead that she's going to be putting on this fellow Alex Sherimit's website. I don't know if you've ever seen Alex's stuff, but yeah. So it's about the dead, and in the end of that which I think is his best work, that short story. You know, he constantly talks about the rain, not the rain, the snow falling everywhere over islands, snowfall. You have to have ideas bubbling. I could show you. You know, I have whole notebooks and papers and folders with ideas for plays. And when I was doing poetry, I'd have post-its all over the place. You have to constantly keep doing that. And so if I'm writing a play about, for example, I'm going to do a play about Catherine the Great sometime this year. If I'm going to do a play about Catherine the Great, and I'm 2/3 of the way through, and something comes to me, I'm going to go with what works and what makes for the best art. Even if it's more difficult, and even if it's not what I intend, because you know what, if I decide to write a poem about Operation Barbarossa, Hitler's invasion of Poland, and it turns out that it's really a poem about Hitler and his dog, well, I can always go back to Barbarossa. If the poem it pulls me to write about Hitler's love for his dogs, I can always go back to Operation Barbarossa. But people get so obsessed, they don't have any plasticity to their creativity. One of the things is you have to be open to it, so that when something comes along, you go with that. This gal that I was almost involved with years ago, her novel is doomed. Even if she is a good, solid, passable writer, it's going to be a stiff, lifeless book, because you can't do that plotting things out, and character X's ex-wife has gastritis on Tuesday when chapter 13 is set. Must make sure that people know that she's farting a lot. What the fuck does it have to do with literature? You know?
Yeah. That's one of the things sometimes I tell people, if you're not willing to throw out the entire whatever it is, because sometimes you have an idea and you're so married to the idea. You're like, no, this is what the thing is. It's nothing else. This is what it is. And if I throw it all away, I've got nothing. But if you're not willing to be able to just do that, to just completely catapult everything you've done, we can just start over.
Yeah. Well, I said with you commented on the writing style in True Life, and I told you how I did that by cutting out 180,000 words from the 4-book series. Well, it would have basically been the same work if I hadn't gotten rid of all the articles and conjunctions and prepositions that were unnecessary. But it may not have hooked you in as tightly because of the slight oddity of that approach that gives that immediacy. And so, I did it. So I took an extra month, 6 weeks or whatever it was, and I went through all the books, and I basically just, carved them down to the essentials.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think I can't remember which one. All 4 books kind of blur together a little bit at this point. But you said this thing that I wish more writers would say about how this is a waltz or something. This is 2 people here. We got the writer, we got the person who wrote it, but we also have the reader. And too often than not, there's no attention given to the actual reading experience of the person reading it. So one of the things I felt when I was reading True Life and Tumbleweeds recently and that I appreciate, because sometimes it's like you just have the writer just writing, and it's like they're talking to themselves. Pretty sure that's something you said. Yeah. It's just like they're talking to themselves, that they have no actual respect for the reader. And it seems like you absolutely do, and you're trying to intentionally make a really good pleasurable thing for us to read. It feels good when you have someone who feels like they know what they're doing, whether it's like making your food, or if they wrote a book, they know what they're doing, and they expect you to have a good time, or at least to enjoy what they're actually doing. They have a plan for you.
If I'm asking you to spend 10, 20, 30 hours, whatever it takes to read my book or read my play, or even 2 minutes to read a sonnet of mine, I'm asking you for a part of your life. I have to give something back in exchange. If all I'm gonna write about is, here's the sexy bitch I knew in '93, here's a love poem I wrote about her, and that isn't necessarily going to excite you. But if I write about that girl in a way that you can say, oh, I knew a girl like that when I studied in Bonn, Germany, whatnot, then there's that hook into it. But people, like I said, people just want to write about themselves. It's my life. But the reason that we know about great artists, and the reason that there are books like Giorgio Vasari's Lives of the Artists, which is a book that I read many times as a kid about the medieval and Renaissance painters and their lives. Not that the lives were necessarily that interesting, but people want to know about it because something hooks them. If you want to know about the life of Stanley Kubrick because you saw Dr. Strangelove or The Shining or 2001: A Space Odyssey, you want to know about that because you want to know, but how is he or she able to do this that would get me to want to know how they did it? But no one really is going to be asking about the greeting card verse of a Maya Angelou or about the masturbatory bullshit of a David Foster Wallace. I'll guarantee you that in the year 2050, there will be a number of David Foster Wallace clones who will be propagated, and David Foster Wallace will slowly fall away. It's happening in painting. All of the abstract expressionists, Mark Rothko, Jackson Pollock, with drip paintings and painting a canvas of one fucking color. And that's bullshit. That's insulting. And finally now, 50 years after the deaths of most of those guys, people are saying, yeah, it was bullshit. It's slowly happening. But my guess is by 2050 or so, most people are going to look back at abstract expressionism and people are going to laugh at it and say, boy, people were really stupid to think this was something.
Well, I really hope for all of our sakes that I've been showing people your work and stuff, and one of the reasons I wanted to do this interview is that I really hope that it's not going to take that long for them to actually see that what you're doing. What you're doing here is something that's I don't know anyone who's ever done something quite like this. Like the most prolific writers I can think of are not pumping out stuff quite of this caliber as consistently as you are. It's actually very bizarre. Like you are in a very 1% of 1% of 1% sort of to the third or fourth power going on right here, and I don't know what to make of it. It's fantastic. It really is enjoyable.
Well, this is one of the things I've told many people. I mean, I have a great deal of talent, but I've known other talented people. I mentioned a few people who have disappointed me recently. One is a fellow who left the arts totally, and if you had gone back 30 years ago when we were both in our 20s, it would have been difficult to predict which one, he or I, would have become a great artist, and which one would leave the arts, because he has a handful of great poems, but he left the arts. In another case, I know a fellow who's could be a great poet and is close to it, but he's religious and he became a preacher. And another example, I know a fellow who had a lot of talent, and he recently, wrote a book, and I read it, and it was his worst work, and I told him so, and I haven't heard from him for months since. Uh, there's another person that I was recently trying to tutor because she wanted help, and I offered help, and she has personal problems of her own, and she probably isn't going to ever become what she could be in that particular art form. And it's frustrating dealing with these people, because I look at it as, if I waste my life and waste my talent, I'm not just wasting my life and my talent. Because the tendrils of the things that I write, this is the thing about great art, is that it is that communication across time and space. If I want to know what, for example, I'm going to do a 5-play sequence on Jason and the Argonauts. I can read the Argonautica by Apollonius Rhodus, who wrote that epic poem. But I can know a little bit about what people then thought of this, that, or the other thing, and that's interesting. And you know, you are just not your own experiences. You're a culmination of the things that came before, whether it's the scientific stuff of the physics of an expanding universe, assuming that's correct, whether it's how human beings differentiated, or how we got opposable thumbs and how that affected the development of our brains, how language came about with the change in the way our larynxes are versus, say, chimps. Even if chimps had the brains to make language, to understand language, they couldn't speak it out loud. They might be able to write it, but they couldn't speak it because they don't have a larynx like we do. All of these things have gone into making you and I who we are. But there is, I mean, I've argued for a lot of people. Alex Sherrimet, for example, doesn't believe in free will. I'm a big believer in free will, because there is no way, like I said, that fellow who 30 years ago you couldn't tell which of us would have become a great writer. The reason that I'm a great writer and he is because we made choices. I took my future, my then future, and I said, no one is going to outwork me, even if I'm working at assorted jobs, shit jobs I've had. I take a certain pride in that, and I took the cosmos, if you want to call it destiny, although I don't believe in destiny since I believe in frugal, but I took charge of my own future, and I willed it. And it's not like that woman who's putting the post-its all across her board to write a shitty novel. It's knowing what can be done, what you can do, and then doing it. And most people can't do that because a part of them don't want to do that. And again, it's what it is.
And so why did you? So you're saying a lot of it's talent. You do have talent, but a lot of the part of it, and something you keep on saying in the memoirs, that you studied great writing, and you tried to figure out why it's great. How can I reproduce this moment of greatness? How can I do this? And so you're saying that you part of it is choice. You chose. There is a alternate dimension out there of Dan Schneider who never chose to do any of this stuff. Went down whatever road it was, didn't write very much anything. So a lot of it was choice. But it also does seem like you are the anomaly, because I do think there are a lot of artists who also choose that, but also their output is not very. It might be good, but it's very slim.
Well, I think if you look at True Life, and again, that's only maybe a small slice of what I actually went through. I have a tendency that if you try to crush me, I'm like a piece of coal. You're going to make a diamond, and I resist being controlled by other people. Or I mean, obviously there are things I could tell you about people who threatened me physically, when I was a kid, or sometimes when I've written certain things, I've had people threaten to sue me about this, that, or the other thing. But it's like, whatever, I've had terrible jobs and terrible bosses and whatnot, and you just have to keep going because in 50 years and 100 years, when both you and I are long dead, no one's going to give a fuck. All that's going to be there is the work. And I've said this before. When you think of Walt Whitman or you think of William Shakespeare, you're not thinking about the guy who lived 400 plus years ago. You're thinking about Shakespeare, the works. The artist becomes the works. Yes, biography then just becomes minutia. If you're reading a great poem about a girl I fucked in 1993 or whatnot, the poem matters. What happened to the girl and me is just trivia.
Right. But that's also I think that's a rare perspective, because most people, when they're writing the stuff, what I'm trying to say is you seem to lack some of the inhibitions that would keep a lot of people from doing this. And that seems
I chose that because my natural state is I would not engage. For example, and in a sense, it's a good thing creatively, because let's say if I had written in 1988, I was contracted by this company called the Edward Mellon Press. Right now, they do a lot of scholarly stuff. They're still around. They wanted me to write a poem on King Arthur, and I wrote the poem, and it was the best thing I wrote at the time, and it's still a good, solid poem, but it's nothing compared to my later work. It's somewhere in my. I have a couple of safes where I have my old manuscripts. It's somewhere there. I haven't seen it in years, but imagine if that book had been published. The press wanted me to then. They became a partial subsidy press, and I decided not to do that because I had subsidy published an earlier, shittier poem in the mid '80s. But I said, no, I'm not going to do that. But imagine if they had published it and it had gotten out to great acclaim, and so I would have had this mediocre poem out there, and people would be raving about it. Well, this is why you need to have good criticism. How many artists that have some talent do something, make a mediocre film or whatnot, and get praised to heaven, and then they get a 4-picture deal to make blockbusters. There's a guy, David Gordon Green is a good example. His first 3 or 4 films were small independent films of quality. Then he started doing, I think he did Halloween, the remake. So he made all this money doing crap. What incentive does he have to go back? What incentive did someone like George Lucas have to make quality films? And he could have been a great filmmaker if you see something like THX 1138, his first film that he made. But he made all this Star Wars crap, and now he's worth $10 billion or whatever the fuck he's for putting out garbage and promoting Joseph Campbell bullshit to the world. So in a sense, creatively and for society in the long run, it might be a good thing that my stuff didn't get out when I was 25 or 30 and I was not a great writer or just becoming a great writer, because I don't think I would have gotten lazy, but it would have been more likely than me being lazy. Now I can go till I drop dead, and I can use the screwings over that I and my wife Jessica have gotten as fuel. But so you have to look at it from that perspective.
I see. It does seem perhaps not being published widely was good for you, and if that's the case, it's unfortunate to see it like that, but it is interesting. It just is odd to me that someone who has such a humongous body of work at this point still is not really being recognized in this way. I can't help but feel that part of it might just be the current culture of it, because I was in it, and again, it's a very polite thing, and if you go up to somebody and say this is shit. One time I was in a class and I criticized the professor's text. She played us some poem about blueberries, and she wanted us to write 4 times in a row about a different take we had on this 8-line poem or something. And by the 4th time, I was just like, fuck it. All right, the blueberries are from Mars, and they represent soldiers. They're gonna come here. They're gonna fucking kill us. So the next class, she had no sense of humor about it. She's like, I'm gonna see you after class, sir. And she got really upset with me. And this seems to be a thing I encounter all the time, is this lack of imagination, just going with it a little bit. Yeah. And so if these are the people who are the gatekeepers of this institution of the arts, then yes, it actually makes perfect sense to me why you have not really been taken up or recognized like this.
So you want to keep going, Ned, talking about art in general, or are there specific things within the book, or what? Go ahead.
Right. I feel like I should talk about the book. It's just the 4 books.
Yeah.
It's just there's so much into them. I feel like honestly, if I had them in front of me, I could. I obviously I took some notes. I took some screenshots of them as I was reading them. There's so much to go into all of them. Like that email I sent to you, even though it was a little bit long, I didn't scratch at all what's actually inside of them. I could go line by line for each of the actual and all the poems too. Let me just say one thing. It's not really a critique so much. I do have one point of contention, but the thing is, you address it in the book. Especially after the first book, you have so many of your memoirs have deal with these rendezvous with these women. Some of them are artsy or whatnot like that, and they don't work out. They don't work out. And I understand because you do address it, but I was really hoping that I was going to see all these women that don't work out for whatever reason. I was really hoping to see a memoir about you and your wife, Jessica, how you guys actually met. I was like expecting that coming towards the end. I was really hoping. I was like, oh, all these women didn't work out. I was really curious about the one who did.
Well, Jessica said at that time she didn't want to be there. The fellow who I told you who had abandoned art and left for a different field was also had the same criticism, and I was like, well, Jessica didn't want it. I've got to live with her, and she busts my balls about a lot of things, so I wasn't going to do that. And Jessica, when she was younger, especially 18 years ago, was the classic kind of artistic wild child. I mean, Jessica had she was a seething volcano of passion, and I didn't need to have her angry. And so, but over the years, I have, for example, in my plays, when I started writing plays in 2017, I do have Jessica Wagner, who is the wife of Danny Wagner, which is my doppelganger. And I said to Jessica, I said, I need to have you in there for the drama, for the art. Jessica didn't need to be here because the book goes to my age 38, and so I was only with Jessica for about 4 years that time, and married 3 years when I wrote that. And so, I had enough, and Jessica, she just didn't want it at that time, and I just respected that.
I understand. Well, that's good to know that I've only at this point I've only read the memoirs and tumbleweeds and whatnot like that. And so one of the things I've started to realize that you do, and I've heard you mention it before, you have these doppelgangers. What is exactly the purpose of the doppelgangers that you have in all these works?
Well, I mean, even like in true life, the Dan Schneider listed there, or Danny Schneider, when I was young, they called me that. I mean, obviously that's not me. When Dante writes about Dante and Beatrice in the Inferno or the rest of the Divine Comedy, that Dante is not the real Dante. So everything is going to be a doppelganger because there's only me in reality. And once I'm dead, I'm dead. But I just use sort of doppelgangers. There are books that I don't use a doppelganger. For example, in the New York Quartet, there's Manny Cole. That's my doppelganger. And if you read Tumbleweeds, he's one of three young boy narrators, and then there's a fourth narrator who may or may not be the older man. He called the legend teller, or whatever I call him.
Right.
In the Vincetti brothers, we see Manny Cole is actively in the story, but he's a minor character relating these three brothers. And then in a Norwegian, he ends up well, I won't spoil it. Not that I believe in spoilers, but you'll see how it evolves. And in various plays, I've used different doppelgangers in other books. For example, I did a book called The Custodian's Bitch a year and a half. A few years ago, I worked as a custodian at a school, and so the character there, who's my doppelganger, is known as Ben Christian. I do have, in poetry, I have 3 poems called the Kevin poems, which is about a gay black character. Yeah, and so that's sort of my doppelganger there. I have Henry Matsumi, a Japanese-American kid who's also another doppelganger. And the reason I have some of these doppelgangers, and some of them are different, is they focus on different areas. So oftentimes when you're writing, let's say, for example, if I'm writing a memoir and I'm writing about a woman or a person who I think was a real asshole, well, sometimes you have to use a different name because you know, I wasn't an asshole. You're the one who was an asshole. Blah blah. And someone's gonna threaten. I've had people threaten to sue me, and who threatened to sue me, even knowing and telling me that they knew that I told the truth, which would have negated any lawsuit. But I'm not going to waste the time going to court to prove something. I'm not a millionaire that has the time and money to waste. So you split real people up into 3 or 4 people, or you take 3 or 4 minor people that you knew and you fuse them into one character. That's basically what I did with the various doppelgangers. Just so that I don't have Dan Schneider in every fucking book, or Danny Wagner. Danny Wagner is my doppelganger in my plays, so I go with him in my plays. In the New York Quartet, I had Manny Cole. In some of my short stories, I had Henry Matsumi, and you know, Oliver. And there are books. I did a book, for example, called what was not the one I just finished, Levels, which is a sort of quasi sci-fi book about a man in this existential science fiction-y type thing where his wife is gone, and so there's a Jessica character and there's a Dan character, but my doppelganger, who's called Tom Alden, isn't really like me. In my mind, he looks like this actor that I based the character on from a 1960s TV show. But he serves as the de facto doppelganger, even though he's not. So you just play around because, you know, you have to have fun. This is another thing with art, too, if you notice.
Yeah.
Most art is deadly serious. You know, again, I have a vaginal wart. I've got to write a novel about having a vaginal wart and getting it diagnosed. Why? Why? You know, I mean, you know.
Yeah. I can definitely see that you're having a lot of fun. Yeah, it's very. I don't want to talk about it too much. I'm only a quarter of the way through. But the beginning of Vincetti Brothers is very exciting because Danny Wagner just like comes in. He's like, "Hey, motherfucker!" He just like says all. I won't go through all the whole thing. It's a lot of fun. I can tell that you're having quite the blast.
Yeah, that was Manny Cole, not Danny Wagner.
Cole, yes, Manny Cole. Right. Manny Cole.
Yeah.
Yes, that was fascinating. That was very cool. But the idea originally, because you started in poetry, you did essays and other things like that. To have the doppelganger, have you in your fiction at all? It's not something that's typically done too often. What was the impetus for
that? Because a lot, like for example, the whole New York Quartet. I mean, the Vincetti Brothers is based upon 3 brothers that I knew, and so I wanted to have someone in there. Now, when I did, for example, my first science fiction novel, The Edge of the Shown, there's no, and in fact, that's part of what I call the heroic trilogy. I did a Western novel, I did a spy thriller. The Western novel was set in 1850 Texas. The spy thriller was set in the late 20th, early 21st century, and then the sci-fi was 1,500 years later. There's no Dan Schneider equivalent in any of them. There was no need for there to be a Dan Schneider equivalent, although it's still all of my whole fictive universe, they're there. So, but what often happens too, I go back to the same things and I milk the same tit for stories, and by doing so, it gives you a parallax on what must have a critic reading, say 4 times about Manny, Danny Wagner in a play, another and a couple of other doppelgangers. They'll talk about maybe the same woman that I might have known, but in different ways, because it just makes things interesting. If you're a painter, and let's say, for example, Andrew Wyeth was a great American painter. He painted a series of paintings about this one woman, Helga, who was a neighbor of his, who he was probably fucking. But you know, every portrait that he does of her, whether it's a nude, whether it's her standing in a field, is different. And in the same way, so that gives you a parallax who this Helga must have been, at least to Wyeth, the artist. And in the same way, if I write about certain incidents that happened in my childhood, and in one way I write about it the way Manny Cole might have experienced it, then I do a similar thing with Danny Wagner. It's just a way of approaching the stuff in a fresh way, and someone who wanted to do a biography might say, well, if we look at how Dan approached this with these 4 different characters, we can get somewhat of what must have really been going on. Because no matter how well I can write, I can't recreate the past. I don't have godlike powers to recreate the actual past. And it's like I said with someone like Marilyn Monroe. If I say Marilyn Monroe to you, a certain image comes to mind. Whether you think she's good or not, she was a terrible actress in my mind, and she never did it for me physically. But you know who that is. Now, if I describe, without using the two words Marilyn and Monroe, if I describe Marilyn Monroe physically, you would get maybe an idea of a woman who was Monroe-esque, but you might not get, you wouldn't have the actual image of Marilyn Monroe that's iconic there. And so words can only do so much. And so sometimes, you know, it's good to use specific markers, whether it's the name of someone. For example, if I was writing about meeting Robert Bly and arguing with him or ripping his shit, you know who that is. Just in the same way as, like I said, if I'm writing about Viking warriors, I don't have to tell you the way Vikings fucking dressed. I just say Vikings around the 9th century in typical garb. You know what it's like.
That's about 10 steps ahead. I mean, yeah. Everything you said was very logical. That's fascinating. It's different. You're thinking in a much more creative way than most people. It's the whole conventional stories that you're not doing. You're doing something very different.
Well, most people look at creativity as over description. How many times have you read a fucking book where, you know, someone will write, oh, here's the main character, and they were wearing this type of dress, and she was wearing these types of stockings, and this shoe with an obscure kind of belt buckle on the top of the shoe, and her breasts were perky, and her nipples, you know, shone through her sundress there, and she was thinking about her Uncle Charles when she was 7, and she went to the playground with him, and she saw a boy, and you get these things that don't add anything to the character. It's just the masturbatory way that, you know, more. We need. I need. You know, if you know, a character is depressed. Well, in chapter 27, we have to reveal that she was molested by a priest. You know, this is this kind of way, rather than letting things be implied. You can draw all types of things from True Life or the Tumbleweeds or the Vincetti Brothers or whatnot, and your for example, your idea of who Manny Cole is going to be different than someone else who read it, and there is going to be no Manny Cole that is the same, just in the same way that you know, the Marilyn Monroe that I described is going to look different if I don't use the word Marilyn Monroe to you or 10 other guys.
Yeah, it reminds me of that you made a video. Someone at TED Talk, they did a creative writing video. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah, you did that whole thing where it's like they just add a bunch of adjectives that they're not related at all to a girl being sick or whatever like that. And then in the point, you make this whole point where it's just like sometimes a short declarative sentence is going to be the number one thing that you want to actually convey what's happening.
Right.
The most direct, to the point. You know, I think you kind of, if it's going to be fancy or whatever, you got to have to kind of earn that a little bit.
But when for example, I talk about total immersion, you can change things up. If, let's say, I have that rat-a-tat-tat style that I use in True Life, but then I'm talking about, for example, in this last book that I wrote called The Grand and the Glorious, there's a couple of mobsters, a father and son mobster that have the same name. Was it Tommy Sclafani? I think it was Tom Sclafani Jr. and Sr. And both of them are people who just talk and talk and talk, and they don't say much, although they sometimes have little gems of wisdom within their verbosity. But that's to establish the character. When I was using this total immersion technique a lot, especially in like a Norwegian in the Family, a lot of times it's not what people are talking about, but how they're talking about that's important. And I might have a 7 or 8 page run of two guys just sitting next to each other bullshitting, two old mobster guys say bullshitting. but they're talking about their old past. What that the details are not important. The way that they relate the details to each other is the important thing, because that gives you the insight into the character. Now, this woman who was putting post-its all across her fucking wall to try to write this terrible trans Moby Dick bullshit novel is never going to understand that type of way, because the way that I'm talking, if you and I were just met somewhere and you came up to me and said, Dan, I read your book, I think it really affected me somehow, the way you and I are talking, or the way our body posture might be, is going to say sometimes a lot more than what you're actually saying, because I may have heard the similar things that you are saying, but maybe you're a bit more pugnacious than another person who came to me up in awe of some reason. Those are the kinds of things that you try to convey, because, as I say, character is plot. No one gives a flying fuck about the crew of the Pequod, just because they're going after that fucking white whale. How the characters relate to each other is the thing, because it gives you an insight into the human condition, or even to move beyond that, into the condition of how people or creatures with brains, assuming they are out there and we're not alone in the universe, how they relate to this cosmos. Why are we here? What is this about? And how does that relate? Now, some madman who's whipping his crew to chase a white whale halfway across the Pacific, in and of itself is interesting, but it's how it's done. Art is about the how, the art of the thing. If I were to write a play about this conversation that we're having via Skype, if I'm just using the transcript of what we're saying, okay, that has some interesting moments. But if I can bring something deeper and take that and immerse it into something, it's like dropping something into a pool of Jello, then it's going to take on some different kind of aspect. Most artists don't think that way because, number one, they can't think that way, or if they do, they get it rubbed out by a system that wants to just churn things out. The problem with arts today is it's been commoditized, commodified, and this started after World War II, where people think you can't teach someone, for example, to write like Melville. You can't. No. You can teach the MLS Chicago Manual of Style way to write a good business letter. Big deal. I need to order 37.3 tons of magnesium ore for our. That's not writing. That's how you write a letter. That's not how you write to touch someone in 1,000 years, because even after all that we have in this world is dust, in 10,000 years, and someone can translate something I wrote, and I've said many times, it could be a creature 10,000 years from now from another species that is reading a translation of an ancient human literature, and one of my poems is there, and it affects that being. That's the thing that's important, not this other bullshit. And anyway, I repeat a lot of the things I say because they're so obvious to me, but to many people it clearly isn't.
No, it clearly is not. We seem to be stunting ourselves. We seem to be doing something wrong. When I read something like, when I read one of your essays, I'm reminded to, in college or high school, wherever you're at, you're always talking about how to write an essay. You're always like, don't use I, don't say this, don't say that. And so you get this very, 8-paragraph page thing, double spaced, of your essay or whatever, but they're not actually teaching you how to write, how you could be to like an essay. You could use the word I. You could use the first person. You could actually get across your point. It seems like we're diluting every single thing that we actually believe that should be good. We're just completely undercutting it. We're destroying it all.
Now look. See, I use my own real life experiences in true life. But even if I'm writing a novel, say, like I said, about sci-fi novel set 1,500 years from now, you can learn things about Dan Schneider. I mean, if that's what you want. I mean, I think I've led an interesting life, but even if I'm in something like that sci-fi novel, the fact that I'm writing about that, or the fact that I write a poem about Al Capone, or the fact that I wrote this, that, or the other thing, that says something about me. If I write a poem about a cat that I love that died, that says something about me, that Dan was a cat lover. Now, that may not be earth-shattering, but it gives some insight. And maybe that ability to empathize with a non-human creature is something that makes a book that I'm going to write in 17 years worth reading. Who knows? But these are the kinds of things, again, that people don't, because we have become a society that just navel gazes. And there are certain times when one has to be reflective or not, but you have to do it in a way that isn't just, oh, I am this ethnicity, I'm this sexuality, I'm this tall, I believe in this religion, I have this political view. Those things are going to filter through what you're writing. One of the best writers, you mentioned how I didn't mention Jessica. If you read that, a great writer was a science writer named Lauren Isley. You probably know the name if you read some of my stuff. He wrote a great autobiography, and in it, he doesn't even he mentions he has a wife, but that lack of biographical information doesn't matter, because you know who that person is. You can speculate on what his life with his wife must have been like, and he focuses on the important things.
It's fascinating. Well, I guess I have another question. Because again, I'm really not sure what percentage I am actually reading your work. Because it seems like you've been pretty hard in the paint for for a long time. I feel I'm pretty far behind because I've read your I've read 5 books at this point. All right. So these you call it your omniverse. This omniverse you have. Where exactly do you think by the time you're done, where is it going to stand in the pamphlet literature? How's it going to be compared to other things?
Well, I mean, when I finished the Vincetti Brothers, I said to people at the time, I said, this is the greatest novel anyone ever wrote. Then I wrote A Norwegian in the Family, and there was a bigger difference between a Norwegian qualitatively and Vincetti Brothers than Vincetti Brothers in any other novel. I mean, it just gets quantum. And when you read that, you will see a lot of these postmodern techniques that the Foster Wallaces and these other people use. I actually use them, and I use them well, because
no,
again, I don't.
Like you're doing the thing that they clip. That's something just to not interrupt you. That's something I've noticed many times. It's like these people who they're actually putting on a pedestal. The guy who's doing it's over here, and no one is actually reading it. It's amazing.
Well, yeah, and there are a lot of bad writers too. There's a guy. Oh, I can't remember his name. He's a bad writer. There's a famous photo of him holding a gun to his head. William something or other. Really bad writer. And he'd write these 2,000, 2,500, 3,000 page books, and I read them, and you can tell there's absolutely no editing. There's no idea about each sentence having some kind of worth. I have an ability that I can edit as I'm going through. There are many times, if you've ever played the slot machine at a casino, and it comes up 3 cherries, you win. With each word that I'm going, let's say if I'm writing a paragraph, with each word, I try to pick the word, and the things come up, and they're constantly whirring, so that as each word determines what the next word is going to be. But it's not determinism, free will. I'll always have the ability to choose. But with a lot of bad writing, or any bad art, you watch a bad film, and 7 minutes into it, you know what's going to happen in an hour from now, because you've seen this 1,000 times before, and a lot of artists just go with that. Now you can subvert that by if a really good artist will make it look like they're setting up a cliche, and then pull the rug out from under you later on. But very few even think in that kind of manner. I think in those ways, just naturally. As far as where things are going to be, I'm an optimist, so I think that again, once I'm safely dead. Once great artists are safely dead, then other people, say, we were wrong, and in 50 years, people are going to say, why was this David Foster Wallace being promoted? Because there's going to be no financial incentive to keep his mythos going. It's only going to be the work. If you read Dave Eggers' shit, and then compare it, let's say, to, True Life, any one of my True Life books versus that memoir that Eggers did. I mean, there's no comparison, and it's obvious. And the thing is, when you have people who are not in the system, who are just people, I've gotten many younger people like yourself over 20 some years, and they all say the same thing. It's because they have not bought into the system. They haven't been commodified. They haven't had their brains neutered. Uh, Again, it's obvious. It's obvious. If I put up any poem, I can put up a fourth or fifth rate poem of mine. It's going to be better than anything Maya Angelou or Donald Hall ever wrote. Why? Because I'm a great writer. They're not. They're, and this is the thing. I mentioned another artist who had potential, and this is a woman that I recently met, and I was helping her with her poetry, and she, for some reason, some personal issues or whatnot, things went awry in her mind or whatnot, and she doesn't like the fact, for example, like a lot of people have said, that I'd say that my stuff is great. Well, what am I supposed to do? Lie to you just out of your discomfiture, And this is someone who has produced great art in another field, but a lot of people, there's this false modesty. I'm not. I don't go around. If I drive to Home Depot or Lowe's to pick up some kind of thing that I need to fix something around my house, I don't say to the cashier, "I'll take that and that." And by the way, I'm the best writer, the greatest writer you're ever going to meet. No, no. People will be like, "Who cares?" Because that has no part of the exchange. But if someone is talking to me like you, what am I going to do? Pretend that? Well, I mean, you're writing to me because you saw my dick pics that I have on some porno site, and Dan, your glands is particularly interesting there. I mean
that word glands, yeah. No, it's interesting because again, this is a polite thing. Most people do not. It seems like in other professions, or athletic or artistic, sometimes maybe not artistic, but like you'll have like a rapper. A rapper will say, "I'm the best ever." Yeah, that happens quite a bit. But I think one of the things that made me really notice you on YouTube is that you did say these things. "I am the best," which is odd. It's like, who the fuck talks like that? That's very strange. Who says that? That made me very curious, obviously. And but then I put it myself in my head. I was like, all right, wait. So I almost didn't go to your website because of it. I think maybe it turned me off a little bit too. But then I started thinking, wait a second. If I was the greatest writer who'd ever lived, and I knew it, that's really important. It's like that. Again, I wish I had some of the poems here right in front of me. You have that one poem where you say, "Greater than transcendence is its recognition." Mm-hmm. So if I was the greatest and I knew I was the greatest, all of a sudden, from my perspective, I would actually be much more. I would be probably worse than you. I'd probably be telling everybody. I probably would be at that person at the checkout line telling them, "Hey, by the way, I'm the greatest writer you've ever seen, who will ever live." I probably would be doing that. And from that point of view, actually, I think you're not. It's not grandiose. It's not. It's humble in a weird way. Actually.
Well,
that's how
it's. I mean, I don't even think of things in that way. The reason this all got started about 1999. A fellow from a local arts newspaper in the Minneapolis area. I had been going to his bookstore that he owned, and over the course of 6 months, a year or something, I think it was before I met Jessica. Before I actually met Jessica. And we would talk about poetry and art, and he was like, "Wow, this is something." And I showed him some of my poems, and he was like blown away. And he's like, he said, "I want to do a piece on you." Now, that particular piece that was done, it was run by people who were in the Minneapolis art scenes, and most of them were bad writers or whatnot. So they actually Baudelarized that article there. Because he had actually included a number of other poems and other stuff, and they just wanted to have the stuff with me telling Bly he was an idiot or something. But at one point, the guy who did the interview asked me if I would, asked me, greater than Walt Whitman or whatnot. And people were like, "How can he say that?" What the fuck did Walt Whitman do? When Walt Whitman got his poetry out there, he appropriated quotes from other people, and he, on his second edition of Leaves of Grass, he said that he was the greatest American poet to that time. Well, and he was, and so the irony was that a guy who was ripped in his lifetime, Whitman, for boasting about his skill. It now, 150 years later, when I say that I was better, I'm better than a better poet than he was. That's something that's ridiculous. But again, it's just silly, and it doesn't bother me. It never really bothered me. But it's like, this is the way people are. You should believe in yourself. This is the politically correct thing. Believe in yourself. Know that, but don't say it. Don't say it. If I'm great at this, that, or the other thing, just know it. Don't say it. Well, if I don't say it, then how am I going to brew it or help other people become what they can be? These people, this woman I talked about, how could I help her with her poetry if I didn't say, well, I'm a great poet? Show me your stuff. I'll give, and I gave great detailed information about her stuff, and was helping her. But then she has her emotional shit, and she can't do it. The typical bullshit that artists do. Like I said, many people turn away from the arts for the silliest of reasons.
Well, I mean, I think it's probably a very small amount of people who are actually capable of doing it. Oh, geez, what were we talking about? Let's see here. I feel bad we haven't really talked about True Life that much, or maybe we have been the whole time. I really wish I had the books in print right next to me. It'd be really good. Unfortunately, the computer that I'm talking to you on is the one that I used to read them all. So let's see here. What do you think is the current projection of the art scene at the moment? Meaning that we seem to be in a really rough spot because it seems to be going on longer than it should have. Basically, after World War II, we had the MFAs come in. All this horrible stuff started happening. Like, it seems like you might not be the only great artist who's actually being skipped over, who's being missed at the moment. Why is this happening? At what point do we leave this dark ages that we actually seem to be in?
I mean, it's cyclical. I mean, from 1910 or so to about 1970, 1980, arguably, you had a 70-year run of the arts in America that I don't think any other country has ever had. And if you look at literature, if you look at films, I put it at 1980 when Reagan came in, could be president. Everything got dumbed down. Everything got dumbed down. People who complain about political correctness rose as a direct opposition to Reaganism. So if you're some right-wing troglodyte who wants to complain about political correctness, it got its start as direct opposition to Reagan. Now, I'm not a believer in the government sponsoring the arts because that doesn't work. But the reason that things got so bad was directly because of Reaganism, and it's just, who knows what it's going to be. Alex Sherman, for example, apparently is doing well in his non-arts career financially, and he says he's going to start a press maybe in a couple of years, and me and my wife Jessica and a few other people in the Cosmoetica sort of circle are going to be the people that he would publish. But again, it would be a small press. But who knows? It could be someone like you or some other artist, maybe some kid who's 16 years old who's going to find Cosmoetica in 5 years, read all the stuff, and then in a few years after that is going to contact like you, and maybe this kid actually knows about art, and maybe this kid has connections, or he's one, and these little things, it's the butterfly effect. Something happens, and who knows? One of the things I'd love to do is I'd love to find a documentary filmmaker in this age that we live in, the Netflix age. There are so many bad documentaries. I remember some woman, I call them vanity documentaries. Wrote, I remember, or she'd made a film about her father, and there was absolutely nothing noteworthy about the father, no reason for the film to be made, but it got onto Netflix or whatnot, and I'm sure it got seen by probably a few 100,000 people. Now, as many hits as I've gotten on Cosmoetica, a good example is on my YouTube channel. I get 1/1000th of traffic because it's a totally different medium. It's like why did most silent film stars not make it in the sound era? It's a different medium. why didn't most radio stars not make it in television? It's a different medium. And in a sense, Cosmoetica got lucky in that it preceded blogs in 2001. Blogs didn't come along until about 03, 04. And it sort of rode the blog wave of the 15, 16 years ago, got popular, and it's sort of always, and now Cosmoetica is basically, because I don't put anything written up there anymore for like since 15 or 16, so it's been 5 or 6 years since I put something up there. So I've been doing the interviews, and my hope too is that someone might want to do a documentary on Cosmoetica or my work, but also too that someone could find all of these interviews I do with people, and even if I wasn't an artist, my 333 right now Dan Schneider video interviews, the stuff I have on YouTube, again, there's no one that I know of. I mean, I've seen interview series where people will interview people all in one field. Like I'm going to interview people who are social psychologists, or people who are computer savvy or whatnot. And I see a lot of those interviews, and some of the interviews are passable. Most of them are terrible interviewers. But if you look at a lot of the stuff, the people I interview, I mean, I get a lot of people who will, after the interview, or even sometimes in the body of the interview, they'll say, wow, Dan, you ask questions no one else has asked me. A lot of times, someone might be 40 years in their field, and we're talking about something. I ask a question, and they don't know, have no idea. And I say, how could you not know? How did this idea not get to you? You've spent 30 or 40 years in your scientific field or your artistic field, and you never had that thought. You had to listen to me bring it up to you. It amazes me sometimes, but then again, that's just how I approach life and look at things more differently than other people, I guess.
I see. Boy, let me see. Boy, so you just published it. You just did a book right now. Let's see here. So let's see. I'm a quarter of the way through Vincetti Brothers. I just finished Tumbleweed. So we can wrap it up a little bit. But let me just ask you a couple questions about Tumbleweed real quick.
Okay.
So it's kind of interesting because I'm sure a lot of people are going to read True Life, and then they're going to read Tumbleweeds. And like me, other people will read Tumbleweeds and they'll read True Life. They'll see a lot of the parallels between your life and whatnot. Let me back up. Let me ask another question. You did not plot out the events in True Life. Did you plot out the narrative at all for Tumbleweeds?
Well, Tumbleweeds is sort of a fictive condensation of the 4 True Life books with some other things thrown in. There's one scene in Tumbleweeds where Manny Cole, his father, who drove a health department van, comes and gives free vaccine shots or whatever it is to people, and that's actually something that actually happened, and it was amazing. It's very similar to what happened in a scene in A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, but I did plot it out a bit more because it's fiction. But again, each of those books you'll see has 64 chapters. So what I would do is I would maybe fill in, okay, here's 42 chapters that I know are going to be in. I plot the general outline, but I also have blank chapters because, as I said, once I get through the first 7 chapters or writing stuff, and sometimes I don't do that. Sometimes I will just go around and I'll do chapter 43 might be the chapter that I wrote first in the book. But as I fill things in, then I'll say, oh, okay, now I know. I thought of a character, for example, in the Vincetti Brothers, 2 characters that came into that book as I'm writing it are called Big Frank Conchetto, a mobster, and the Norwegian, which later I gave the book a Norwegian in the family to, because of those 2 characters that arose in the middle of writing Vincetti Brothers. So, I mean, I had a bare skeleton outline, but what actually came through, that's something that, as I said, 20% of the way in, I said, oh, I got to put this in a chapter. Oh, I don't have anything for chapter 51. Let me put it there. And so there's a famous quote by John Huston. I think it's John Huston, although it's been attributed to other people. He's a Hollywood director from the golden age of Hollywood who said something like a good film or a great film is 4 or 5 great scenes, and then you string the stuff together and you have a great film. And
I've heard that too.
yeah, in certain ways, there's some truth to that. I make everything great. I don't like to have just passages or a chapter that's just connected. There has to be something in each of the chapters. But as you have the overall plot and you start filling things in, it's sort of like people, if you've ever seen people putting insulation in their homes. They use this foam, they spray the foam in the house, and then it swells up to 10 times its size. Well, that's sort of what I do with the art, is that, I'll put down the basics of that, and then I might go in on a day for, say, a scene that I'm writing in a play or whatnot, and I'll say, okay, this is the scene where this character and that character are going to argue. I don't know what the argument's going to be about, but as I'm writing it, something from my undermind comes up. It's the convective way my mind works, like a convection current. Something's stirring in my id, and then vroom, it comes up, and bam, I'll say, oh, so this is what the argument's about. Then I'll say, oh, the argument that I had in scene 11 of that play, now I need to go back to scene 3 and just throw in, sometimes maybe it's just a word or a sentence that acts as the augury for what's coming in scene 11. And that's how you do things organically. You let you play, you're open to things. And as you're starting out any work, every choice you make starts opening things up. It's like entering a home. There's the one door that opens there, but you can go in this room or that room. If you go in this room rather than that room, then you have to go into those 2 or 3 other rooms, etc. And then there comes a point, though, when you've passed the 50% mark stuff, and each choice you make starts closing things down, so that the work, you might not know what the ending is going to be, but when you're getting to 85, 90% in, the ending becomes inevitable. Not that it's cliched in that sense, inevitable, but it crystallizes and say, that's how I'm going to end it. And so I'll have a work there are many times I've had a work, and I said, this is my idea of what it's going to be like, but I don't know the specifics. When I get to the end of the work, I will have hit most of the points. Some I may not have the points that I was going to have in, but I'll have something better than I originally started out with, because I've been open to letting the influences come into me and letting my mind go. Creativity isn't just one thing. I'm going to write this. When I wrote A Norwegian in the Family, the first thing that came to me was the first word said by the Norwegian that opened the book. But I didn't know what the rest of the book was going to be like. I thought that book was going to be smaller than the Vincetti Brothers, which is like 603,000 words. I thought A Norwegian in the Family was going to be maybe 250, 300,000 words. Still a long book, but then it became 2.5 million.
Yeah. It's a very long. It takes a long time for it to load on my computer. It's very interesting. I can't think of any other book that's quite that long. Oh boy. Well, I can't wait till I'm done with the Vincetti Brothers. But at the same time, I don't really want to finish it. It's a great pleasure to be reading it, actually. Like, it's nice. Every single chapter, there's actually like a point to it. I just passed the point where the Vincetti Brothers' his sons are being bullied. Yeah. And then the story is like how he gets after them. But then May Cole's like, now look, this might be apocryphal. I don't know, but this is accordingly what he made them do, but maybe it's not what he made them do. Yeah. And I'm really enjoying myself so far. I must say, I'm really enjoying myself.
Yeah.
Real quick, before we, unless you want to say something about that.
No, go ahead.
Before we finish, because I think we've gone pretty far. I would really like. I see this interview as like, we talk about true life, we're talking about arts and stuff like that. But I have a lot of friends back home who I really want to read your stuff. And before this point, it's just been like, well, I've met this guy on the internet. He sent me some novels and stuff, and I want you to read them. I think this is a really good introduction to. I could send them this video and tell them like, why. Here's more information for you. I just have a couple quick questions. A selfish question, actually, because you have a lot of opinions on certain writers. Like, your opinions on Shakespeare is pretty big, pretty interesting for me, quite frankly, because it's funny how most people about 10 or 12 of his best poems, but no one knows who wrote King Jonathan. Shakespeare wrote King Jonathan, but no one's read it. No one has any idea what's inside King Jonathan because it's not as good as the other ones, I guess.
Well, is that one of the disputed plays, because King Jonathan doesn't. I mean, he has 37 supposed canonical plays, and then there's 4 or 5 others. So is that one of the 4 or 5 that's disputed?
Oh, I have no idea. All I know is it's in his works that they include in every single collected editions. I'm not sure if it's not, but even if it's not, then there's other ones that no. I mean, literally, just no one talks about them. Mm-hmm. No one talks about them. The guy who supposedly never wrote a bad word, and 60% of his body of work is not even really studied that often.
Hmm.
No.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm not one of those people that think Shakespeare was a bad writer, and I don't think Shakespeare was not Shakespeare. Everything points to Shakespeare being William Shakespeare or whatever it was written, and I don't think he was gay. I mean, some of the poems that are supposedly the Dark Lady poems or poems written to men, he's taking a fucking female point of view in 90% of them, and the 1 or 2 that might be from a male perspective are not even really particularly sexual, but a lot of people like to make that kind of shit up. Shakespeare was certainly a great writer. If you're going to tell me that Shakespeare was the greatest writer in English language or world history, well, I mean, that doesn't say much about the world then, because, I said this before. If I was like Woody Allen and went to sleep for 1,000 years in some, they cut off my head and froze my head and then revived me in 1,500 years or something, and I came and there was a cult of Schneider, like there's a cult of Shakespeare, I'd be like, what the fuck happened? I would be that would. I mean, there should be in 1,500 years at least a few dozen writers that have gone beyond me in that time. Because if they haven't, then the culture and human mind has stagnated.
Yeah, I can see that. Actually, I have one selfish question real quick. Have you ever read anything by Thomas Wolfe?
I have read parts of it. Jessica read what is it, The River, and.
Time in the River.
Time in the River, and then there's the other one, the more famous one that was complete. I've read parts of them. Yeah, I've read parts of them. I haven't read the whole thing. Jessica, from what I do remember of reading it, and I think I read one of his short stories, but from what I remember of Time in the River, he needed a better editor. I mean, and I know that that book was edited down. The legend of that book is sort of like the legend of Foster Wallace's piece of shit. What is it? In that Foster Wallace, Infinite Jest, both Infinite Jest and Time in the River supposedly were 3 or 4 times their length, and they went through subsequent editions. Now, from what I can tell, Time in the River has some great moments, and probably could have been pruned a bit more. There's no editor in the world that could have made fucking Infinite Jest good, much less great.
Yeah. It would be interesting if you ever read Look Homeward Angel, because that's the only book by.
I read part of it.
I only asked because the story, the setting was Asheville, where I'm from in North Carolina. You've heard of Asheville, so he's kind of like the artistic god of Asheville. So that's why I've read it, and it's not a typical book I would have read. So I was just curious if you'd ever read anything by it.
I mean, I've got those books. There's lots of writers. I was just getting my wife into. I told her to read Beryl Markham, who's a woman who was an aviator like Amelia Earhart, and there's controversy over whether she wrote her book or her husband did. Although her husband never wrote anything afterwards, and it's a memoir, and it's one of the better memoirs about. She was an African aviator, a white woman in colonial Africa, but it's an excellent book. There are lots of writers that should be read. If you're a feminist, for example, you should be promoting the people like Beryl Markham. My wife just did an interview with Alex Sherman about Aurora Leigh from Elizabeth Barrett Browning. All anyone knows about Elizabeth Barrett Browning is the sonnets from the Portuguese, and the one, the most famous one, which I don't remember the first line. 1 or 2 of her sonnets. Yet this is a novel in verse that's better than anything that was written by the Bronte sisters. Better than anything written by what's her name? The one who wrote Jane Austen. Jane Austen wrote.
Jane Austen, right?
Yeah. But it's better than anything, and it's a novel in verse. Now, it's arguably probably not a great work overall, technically, but the audacity of it, it's by far the best novel in verse that I've ever read. There's nothing even close to it. But again, So we'd rather pimp bad writers, uh, modern writers or whatnot, and we're going to slight that. So it takes time. If I can help promote someone like a James Emanuel, the black poet I mentioned, if I can help promote an Aurora Lee in what little ways I can with my slim outreach here. I mean, Cosmoetica has had. I think I'm coming on this. I'm going to have had 1 billion people at least look at it over 21, 22 years. But you say 22 billion visitors, or 1 billion visitors in 22. Wow, that's impressive. Well, not really. I mean, you got to think Amazon and these big websites, they get 500 million viewers in six hours. So in terms of the arts, Cosmoetica, has been a big and influential in its own way, but the arts are a very small part of the pond. If you look at the world ocean, all the water in the oceans as being all of the internet, Cosmoetica is maybe, uh, a good sized lake. Maybe it's the Great Salt Lake, versus all the rest of the water, you know.
Mm. No, I think it's something. I think one of the reasons that I or other people like me have found your website and your site is that we haven't drinking the Kool-Aid in the MFA world, wherever it is. We don't believe. We think that David Foster Wallace, like, even before you said it, it didn't sit right with me. Some of the stuff I read by him, like, why is this guy so? He seemed more of the mystique, like a cult of personality of some of these people, like people they really get into. I'm not sure your opinion on Hemingway is, but I always thought the man and stuff was much more interesting.
Well, whose stuff was more interesting than Hemingway? Did you say?
I always thought that the man himself, Hemingway, like the legend of Hemingway. I thought that's more interesting than what he wrote.
I think he crafted his legend very well. I think The Old Man and the Sea is the best thing he ever wrote. He's certainly better than someone like Faulkner. Faulkner, when I read Faulkner for the first time, I read 3 or 4 books. I've read parts of Sound and the Fury. It's like how does someone, now Faulkner had some talent, but he's someone who could have used a good editor too. But then you look at something like Sylvia Plath. She was a great poet, but The Bell Jar is a terrible book. It's a terrible novel.
I guess it's just people can't see it. I remember some of the few times that I really criticized a writer or someone's taste in something in college, because this is a place where I thought we were supposed to be doing this. They would get really upset. They couldn't. I remember I made this girl cry once because she had a tattoo of a quote of David Foster Wallace's, and I criticized David Foster Wallace, and then she shows me the tattoo. All right, my bad. I wouldn't have done it if I knew that. But then she's like, I've literally never heard somebody criticize David Foster Wallace in my life, ever. So she's like, I was just shocked when you actually were saying that.
Well, see, if this woman had shown me that as a response, my response would have been just simply, so you've got a tattoo from a bad writer. What the fuck is that? Is that an argument? But you know that this is a fangirl. That if she had actually met him, they would have been fucking 2 days later at the maximum. Because that's all those people want. If I was single, for example, I would not be looking for fangirls or whatnot. It'd be nice if someone could tell me. But you have, if someone tells me that they like my stuff, and I always make the difference between like and qualitative scale. If someone says that they like my stuff, I say, okay, that's nice, but do you understand why this works? If you tell me, Dan, that poem that you did about Rilke or whoever it might be, or what the poem might be, that really moved me. Okay, it moved you. Why? Go think to yourself, why? Was it the quality of the work? Was it because you just have an emotional connection? Most people have these emotional connections to things. I mentioned, some of these people that gave up art. A lot of them pursued it because it made them emotionally fulfilled. When it wasn't emotionally fulfilling for them, they gave it up. Or they weren't going to pursue it unless they're getting something emotionally. But again, this is that solipsism. I know that I have a great deal of talent or whatnot. It's not about me. when I people go, well, Dan, you're saying you're a great artist. How could it not be about you? It's not about me. It's about you or any other person reading it, because long after I'm dead, no one's going to give a fuck about my life. The only reason anyone might give a fuck about me or my parents or that I had a sister or that I'm adopted and had a natural family, all these other little biographical trivial details, is because I affected their mind. And I've said this many times, so I don't know if you have to go because it's late where you are, but you always have to shoot to get someone's mind going, because when you get a mind going, it'll have an emotional effect. They're connected. There isn't a disconnect between the emotional and the intellectual. If all you're doing is shooting for the emotion, though, you know what it's like? That's a Hollywood tearjerker movie. You know, that's like watching a bad soap opera where someone is dying and the actor is just blubbering and whatnot. That's not what matters. If I get to your mind and I make you think, guess what? 2 years later, if you go back to that same poem, you're going to remember that tickled your mind there, and you're going to have there's going to be an emotional reaction, because memory is often instigated by smell and other things that are subliminal. You're going to have that subliminal reaction, and that's going to get that emotion to you, and that's going to be an emotion that you're going to come back to and back to and back to again, rather than that Hollywood tearjerker. People remember great lines from poetry. They don't remember, they don't remember shit when they're dying from tearjerker movies. Only from the great art that affects them. In my last breath for something that I take, I'm going to probably be thinking about something emotional. I'm not going to necessarily, I can feel. I think I have 7.3 seconds before I'm dead. That's not, people don't think like that. I don't think. Maybe there was a few outliers, but the vast majority are going to be having those memories of things, and hopefully the art that's affected them.
Yeah. Oh, boy, yeah. I think you've given me quite a bit to think about.
Well, hopefully we can do another one of these too. Once you finish Vincetti Brothers, and then eventually the Norwegian, we can do that. So if you have no more questions, we can end here. Or if you have a final question, let's go ahead.
I really don't think I do. This is my very first time ever doing an interview or something like that. So it's very. I hope it went okay.
Yeah.
All I really had was I just had a lot of general questions for this I just met you online. You make all these claims and you send me all this stuff, and I've been really blown away by quite a bit of it. So I hope everything was smooth.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Ned, and we'll end it right here.